Commander Varesa's voice cut through the mess hall like a blade. "Stand up, Reyes. I want every officer on this deck to see what an unqualified breach of protocol looks like." Daniel Reyes set down his fork, wiped his mouth once with a napkin, and rose from the bench without a single word. Around him, 300 officers from a dozen alien worlds went completely silent. Trays stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in that vast steel hall turned toward the one human standing calmly among them, while the fleet's most decorated commander pointed a long clawed finger directly at his chest. Nobody in that room expected what was about to happen in the next 12 minutes. They thought they already understood this man completely. They were about to find out how wrong an entire fleet could be. The flagship Aurelian Accord carried representatives from 11 allied species, humanity among the newest and least understood. Most of the crew still measured strength by how loudly someone spoke or how visibly they carried their pride. Daniel Reyes carried none of that. He was in his 40s, quiet, unremarkable to look at, the kind of man whose name people forgot until they needed him. He served as the fleet's senior rescue specialist, the one they called when something had already gone wrong. Commander Varesa did not know that yet. What she knew was simpler. 6 hours earlier, security logs had shown Daniel entering Corridor 7, a restricted maintenance section sealed under direct fleet order. No authorization. No report filed. In her experience, a soldier who broke protocol without explanation could not be trusted, and trust was the only thing holding a fleet together. "You entered a sealed corridor without clearance," she said, her voice carrying easily across the silent hall. "You filed no incident report. You offered no explanation to your superior officer. Do you have anything to say for yourself, Specialist Reyes?" Daniel looked at her, steady and unhurried. "No, Commander." A murmur rippled through the room. Even the aliens who barely understood human expressions could read the shape of it. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't even trying. Near the back wall, an older alien logistics officer named Captain Oren kept his eyes fixed on Daniel, his 4 fingers pressed flat against the table in front of him. He said nothing. Regulation forbade him from speaking during a formal hearing unless called upon, and he had not been called upon. But something in his posture, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the corridor access panel near the door, suggested he knew something the rest of the room did not. Varesa continued, her tone hardening. "In my experience, silence in the face of a clear violation means only one of 2 things. Either you have no defense or you believe yourself above explanation. Which is it?" "Neither, Commander." "Then explain." Daniel held her gaze for a long moment. "Not yet." The words landed strangely in the room. Not a refusal. Not defiance. Just a simple statement, delivered without heat, as if he were waiting for something the rest of them hadn't noticed arriving. Varesa's confidence had built over 20 years of command, across 2 wars and 100 disciplinary hearings, and she had never once seen a soldier respond to a serious charge with such flat calm. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She believed a fleet was held together not by fear but by the certainty that no one stood above the rules, and she genuinely believed she was protecting these people by making an example. She was not being cruel. She was doing what she believed was right. "Then I have no choice," she said. "Effective immediately, Specialist Reyes is suspended from active rescue duty, pending full review." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. Whispers passed table to table. Somewhere near the front, a younger alien officer murmured that humans truly were as reckless as the old briefings warned. Others weren't so sure. They had worked alongside Reyes during 3 separate emergencies over the past year, and the man they knew did not match the picture being painted in front of them now. Captain Oren's hand tightened slightly against the table. He glanced down at a small data slate resting near his elbow, a maintenance schedule he had quietly altered that morning without logging a reason, and slid it face down before anyone else could see it. Varesa raised her voice to formally close the hearing, and that was the exact moment the alarms tore through the ship. Not the low pulse of a routine warning, but the sharp, rising shriek reserved for structural failure. Red light washed across every wall. A voice from the ship's system announced, flat and urgent, that Reactor Section 4 had suffered a containment breach, and that maintenance crews were trapped behind a collapsed support beam with rising radiation levels climbing by the second. Varesa froze for half a second, the first hesitation anyone had seen from her in years. Every instinct from 20 years of command screamed at her to follow procedure without question. Reactor 4 sat directly behind the very corridor Daniel had entered 6 hours earlier. Protocol was absolute. The compartment had to be sealed immediately, which meant the trapped crew would be abandoned to buy time for the rest of the ship. For the first time in her career, following the rule she trusted most felt like it might cost lives instead of saving them. Varessa's hand was already moving toward the comm panel to issue the seal order when Daniel spoke. "Belay that order, Commander. There's a way through and I already know it." The hall froze. Varessa's hand stopped in midair, hovering over the panel. 300 officers who had been watching a disciplinary hearing a moment earlier now sat perfectly still, watching something else entirely. "You already know it," Varessa repeated slowly, "or you're guessing." Daniel didn't move toward the door yet. Instead, he turned to the main display and began speaking, calm and exact, naming the shaft junctions, the support beam positions, the distance between each access point, down to the meter, reciting the layout of a corridor he had supposedly only glanced at once in passing. It was the layout of a man who had spent hours crawling through that space, not one reading from memory of a single unauthorized walk. Nobody in that hall said a word. "How do you know all of that?" Varessa asked quietly. "For a corridor you weren't cleared to enter?" "Because I found a stress fracture in that support frame this morning, during an inspection nobody else had scheduled," Daniel said. "I didn't file a report because I had no proof yet, and raising an alarm without evidence would have caused a panic over nothing. So I went back in alone, moved 11 maintenance workers out through an old access shaft before their shift started, and told them to stay clear until I could confirm the damage. That's the violation you're disciplining me for." The room had gone utterly silent again, but this silence carried a different weight than before. "You had 11 lives at risk and told no one?" Varessa's voice had lost its hard edge. "I told the workers. That was enough to save them. Going through channels first would have taken hours of review while that fracture failed with a full shift still inside." Daniel was already walking toward the corridor door, pulling a maintenance harness from the emergency locker. "The support beam's down now. Whoever's trapped needs someone who already knows the layout." Varessa looked at Captain Oren, and for the first time the old officer spoke without being asked. "He came to me this morning, Commander," Oren said quietly. "Asked me to quietly reassign the second shift without explanation. I didn't understand why at the time. I do now." Nobody moved to stop Daniel as he stepped into the smoke-filled corridor. 2 younger officers grabbed harnesses and followed, and Varessa herself gave the order to hold the reactor seal, buying precious minutes based entirely on the word of the man she had just suspended. What happened over the next 11 minutes would be recounted across the fleet for months afterward, though never by Daniel himself. He led the rescue team through a narrow access shaft only he had mapped, guiding 4 trapped engineers past a buckling support strut moments before it gave way. Halfway through, the shaft lights failed completely, and Daniel kept moving by memory alone, calling out distances in a calm, even voice while radiation alarms climbed higher on every suit around him. He carried an unconscious crew member across his shoulders for the final stretch. When the last of the trapped crew emerged into the clean corridor beyond, coughing but alive, the reactor section sealed cleanly behind them, with less than 90 seconds to spare. Commander Varessa stood at the corridor entrance as the crew was carried past her toward Medical Bay, and when Daniel finally emerged last, soot streaked across his face, harness straps still smoking faintly at the edges, she did something none of the assembled officers had ever seen her do. She stepped aside and let him pass first. "Specialist Reyes," she said, and her voice had none of its earlier certainty left in it. "I owe you a correction in front of everyone who witnessed the first one." Daniel shook his head slightly, still catching his breath. "You don't owe me anything, Commander. You made the call you believed was right with the information you had. That's all any of us can do." "I stood you up in front of this entire deck and called it discipline," Varessa said. "It wasn't. You held this fleet to a standard," he said simply. "I just happened to be standing on the wrong side of it for a few hours. That's not the same as being wrong to hold it." The hall remained silent, but it was a different silence now, heavier and more honest than the one that had opened the hearing. Where officers had once exchanged uncertain glances at a man who wouldn't defend himself, they now looked at him the way soldiers look at someone they'd trust with their lives. Varessa turned to address the room, her voice steady again though changed. "Let it be recorded that Specialist Reyes's suspension is rescinded, and that fleet protocol regarding unverified structural risk will be reviewed, effective immediately." Daniel only nodded once, then walked quietly back toward his half-finished meal, as though the entire fleet hadn't just watched him rewrite what they thought they knew about him. Captain Oren caught his arm gently as he passed. "You could have said something the moment she called you up." "I didn't have proof yet that the fracture was real," Daniel said. "Making noise before I was certain would have caused a panic for nothing, or worse, an evacuation order that trapped people in the wrong places. Staying quiet was the only responsible thing to do." Even while she humiliated you. Daniel allowed himself the smallest, tired smile. I wasn't trying to be right, Captain. I was trying to keep everyone alive. Sometimes those two things don't happen on the same schedule. He sat back down at his table, picked up his fork, and finished his meal in the same quiet way he'd started it. 12 minutes earlier, an entire deck had heard their commander tell this man to stand and be shamed in front of the fleet. Now, without a single word from anyone, they simply stood themselves, one table at a time, until the whole hall was on its feet around him. Daniel didn't look up. He had never once been trying to prove what kind of man he was, only to make sure everyone else made it home, and for the first time since humanity had joined that fleet, 300 officers finally understood that some men only need to be told to stand once, and after that they never sit back down the same way twice.